This is the GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers. That is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW. Written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. This is flyer number 127, entitled MGTOWs, Masculists, Enemies. Description. This flyer lists the main enemies of the MGTOWs/Masculists and explains why they are enemies. Fluffy crappers, fluffies, fluffy feminists, gender politicians, and the worst, the hated Jewish bankster Frankist Satanists, whom everyone hates, if they are informed. Flyer itself. MGTOWs/Masculists enemies. This flyer talks about the enemies of the MGTOW/Masculists, who they are and why they are our enemies. I list them now and will say more about them later. They are the fluffy crappers, the fluffies, the fluffy feminists, the gender politicians, and worst of all, the hated Jewish bankster Frankist Satanists. Fluffy crappers are young women of 16 who choose to study fluffy crap at high school. That is the soft option, that is non-math, non-sciences, so they don't have to think hard and use their brain to master math and the sciences. As a result of studying fluffy crap at high school, they're forced to study more fluffy crap at university, that is non-STEM, that's science, that's STEM, science, tech, engineering, math majors, and the professions. So get a diploma that the economy does not value, making these fluffy crappers inevitably become fluffies in their 30s, when their biological clock starts ticking hard, when they realize they are incapable of affording a middle-class house to raise their kids in. So they start looking around for some gullible, that is non-MGTOW-Masculist, manslave to pay for the house, to pay for her and for her kids. These women are considered to be immoral, parasitic, manslaving vermin by the MGTOW/Masculists, who punish them by refusing to have anything to do with them, not even sexing them, letting them rot on the shelf to extinction. Fluffies, that's traditional women who expect to be able to parasite off the money of a man, are the enemy of the MGTOW/Masculists. The primary political goal of the Masculists is to wipe out fluffydom by wiping out fluffies, not by killing them, but simply refusing to go near them, not sexing them, not having relationships with them, thus forcing them to become fips or they rot on the shelf. Most feminists are fluffies. They've had their feminist consciousness raised, but not their MGTOW/Masculist consciousness raised. So by default, they still have traditional female expectations of men. That is, they unconsciously expect men to be manslaves, to be cash machines for women. So one of the main tasks of MGTOW/Masculists is to educate women to be fips, or they become the enemy of the MGTOW/Masculists and will be punished. MGTOW/Masculists much prefer to have tway-tway relationships with fips and avoid fluffies like the plague. Fluffy feminists have taken over the divorce courts and pressured the gender politicians to give them divorce laws that financially massacre men. One married father in 4 is routinely financially massacred in these fluffy feminist-dominated divorce courts, so that a divorcing father will lose his kids, his house, pay child support and alimony to his fluffy wife, so that she can continue to parasite off his money after the divorce, the way she did before the divorce. These divorce courts are a massive gender injustice to men, and so are hated by MGTOWs/Masculists. The financial massacring of divorcing men is so bad that 2/3 of young men under 35 in the US refuse to marry, refuse to have kids, and spend their money on themselves. They're on a man strike. MGTOW/Masculists are prepared to wipe out whole populations until the gender politicians men-fair the gender laws. Re-divorce, bringing in the para, paternity rejection rate, etc. Do the math. With the young generation reproducing only 1/3 of their number in a mere century, four generations, that's 1/3 of 1/3 of 1/3 of 1/3, which is about 1%, so the population gets wiped out. The Japanese equivalent of the MGTOW movement is called the herbivore, it's distinct from carnivore, movement. It means grass eaters. It has been going on a decade longer than in the West, So the Japanese population is already starting to fall, and the Japanese politicians are pulling their hair out. There's even a minister of population whose job is to try to persuade young Japanese men to be fathers. That minister is not succeeding because the root problem in Japan is not being tackled, and that is the extreme fluffy nature of women in Japan. In Japan, the husbands overwork and the women play tennis. The average Japanese salaryman will work 11 hours a day, 3 hours commute time, and hand over his salary check to his wife, who controls the spending of his money. Young Japanese men, influenced by Western ideas on the internet, are saying in massive numbers, quote, "Fuck this, I'm not going to be a manslave to some bloody fluffy. I'll work much less, spend my money on myself, and to hell with fluffy parasites." End quote. MGTOW/Masculists hate the gender politicians because it's they who imposed men unfair gender laws on men. These gender politicians created the new divorce laws in the 70s that are so biased in favour of divorcing fluffy wives, which financially massacre divorcing fathers to such a point that we now have the man strike. The gender politicians will have to mend-fair the gender laws or whole populations will get wiped out. It's only a question of time before they are forced to make the necessary reforms, or they will risk assassination. There is nothing more important to human beings than the survival of human beings. By not men-fairing the gender laws, whole populations get wiped out by the MGTOWs/Masculists refusing paternity, so the gender politicians will inevitably become the targets of political murder. They will be assassinated, so they will men-fair the gender laws. The greatest enemy of the MGTOW/Masculists, and in fact to everyone, that is all categories of people, including ordinary Jews, are the hated Jewish bankster Frankist Satanists, who are destroying whole continents. In the 20th century, they were indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 200 million people. They have already made Russia and China brutal dictatorships. The Russian Revolution was not Russian, it was Jewish, financed largely by Schiff, a Jewish New York bankster who wanted the Tsar's gold, and got it. He paid $20 million of his own money to send several hundred Jewish communists, including Trotsky, Jewish name Lev Bromstein, and Lenin, a quarter or half Jewish, to Russia. These Jewish communists then went on to create the greatest Holocaust in history, killing 66 million white Christian Russians, says Solzhenitsyn, the great Russian author, in his book Die Juden in der Sowjetunion, The Jews in the Soviet Union in German. It was a bestseller in Russia and was published in Germany. Mao, that's Mao Zedong, the first dictator of China, but of the communists. Mao was flooded by Jewish banksters in his early days before he took power in China in 1949. Dictatorships are easier to control by Jewish banksters, which is why they are steadily doing the same to the US, Europe and Japan, three other superpowers of the world. All three of them need to be taken down before the Jewish banksters can rule the world from Jerusalem to fulfill their Jewish Talmudic religious prophecy. These Jewish bankster Satanists are insane, but they are dangerously insane. The Rothschilds are estimated to be worth $500 billion, owning about half of the wealth of the world. They have the financial power to put their protocols, that's an allusion to the infamous book entitled Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, which is a step-by-step blueprint on how Jews can take over the world. To put their protocols plan steadily into effect. These hated Jewish bankster Frankist Satanists are now about to do to the US, Europe and Japan what they did to Russia and China, that is, turn them into a police state dictatorship with them as the dictators, all part of a step-by-step plan as laid out in the infamous book. I've got to stop ad-libbing. The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, one of the best sellers in history. Historical events over the past century and the steps in the protocols dovetail so closely that it's clear that these Satanists are using the protocols as a blueprint which they wrote. These hated Jewish bankster Frankist Satanists, that is, followers of Jacob Frank, YouTuber, the 18th century Jewish Messiah, who reversed the Ten Commandments in the Jewish Torah, who taught that the more evil that his followers commit, the sooner the Jewish Messiah will come to earth, conquer the Goy, that's non-Jews, rule the world with its capital in Jerusalem, and then wipe out the Goy, so that the Jews can have the earth to themselves. That's the prediction, the prophecy of the religious Jews. The Torah and the Talmud is full of this prophecy, one of the foundation stones of the Jewish religion, Judaism, one of the vilest religions ever invented by humanity, because it preaches a vitriolic hatred against the Goy, that is non-Jews, that is 99.8% of humanity, in other words, virtually everybody. This step-by-step plan of the hated Jewish banksters, Frankist Satanists, sounds so crazy that most people cannot get their heads around it, yet the evidence is there. The internet is full of level-headed scholars who present the evidence for all this. You only have to bother to look, but most people don't. Most people are too distracted by the Jewish elite-controlled media Hollywood, watching dumbed-down trivia to be bothered to get rid of these Jewish bankster vermin who are out to destroy them. These hated Jewish bankster Frankist Satanists control the issuance of money in nearly every country on earth, so can print up as much as they want to bribe the politicians, including gender politicians, to do what they want, thus destroying democracies. They inflate the currency, thus wiping out people's savings. They make debt slaves of us all with their paper money, debt note, Ponzi schemes. They've assassinated 6 US presidents, 4 successfully, 2 almost. They played a major role in the engineering of the 2 world wars, bribing and threatening the major players in the 2 world wars. World War I was about causing the fall of the Persian Empire, so that the Rothschilds, Red Shields in German, the greatest criminal Jewish family in history, could get Palestine. Churchill, Roosevelt, Stalin, all Jews, were bribed to create World War II. Hitler was funded by US Jewish banksters from the start. Hitler's role was to force out ordinary Jews from Germany to Palestine by putting Jews in ghettos and later concentration camps. There was no gassing. That was an abusive myth created by the same Jewish banksters to extort so-called guilt money from the US and Germany to prop up a bankrupting Israel in the 70s. There was no talk of the Holocaust with a capital H in the 50s, straight after the war. Let that sink in. They switch on booms and busts by controlling the money supply, buying up assets for pennies on the dollar when businesses go bankrupt during the depressions these Jewish banksters generate at will. These same Jewish banksters set up the Fed, that's the Federal Reserve System, the IRS, the FBI, and the ADL, Anti-Defamation League. It's a Jewish organization to suppress criticism of Jews, and particularly Jewish banksters, central banksters, like Rothschilds, Schiffs, Warburgs, and so on. And the ADL, all in the same year. The Fed steals half of people's federal taxes, going straight into the pockets of the Jewish banksters, who are the Fed. The Fed is not a government agency, it's a private bank, owned by the Jewish bankster Frankist Satanists, largely the Rothschilds, then the Schiffs, Warburgs, Rockefellers, etc., all Jewish Frankists. The ADL then started pushing for the creation of hate speech laws to suppress critics of the supreme anti-Goy activities. France, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Canada, Australia, etc. have such laws today, so it's illegal to criticize the greatest criminals against humanity in history. So, if you're not suffering cognitive dissonance from the above, if you are, then bother to educate yourself on these issues from material on the internet, especially YouTube. Then it should be obvious why MGTOW-Masculist, and in fact any informed person, male or female, consider that the hated Jewish bankster Frankist Satanists are the greatest enemy of men, of women, in fact everyone, except a few hundred hated Jewish bankster Frankist Satanists, who should be sent to The Hague, the International Criminal Court, and be executed for their massive crimes. The tragedy of these hated Jewish bankster Frankist Satanists is that once they have crashed the dollar, rejected as the world reserve currency by the world, due to the massive money printing by the Jewish bankster-controlled Fed, and brought in the police state laws that Obama was groomed as a puppet president to sign, then a civil war will break out in the US. There are more guns in the US than Americans, so when the US standard of living drops to about a third of its current level, and current is when I wrote this, which is say early 2016, so that's getting on to 2 years ago, And the Jewish bankster-controlled Department of Homeland Security, DHS, starts its holocaust of the American people, similar to what the US Jewish banksters did to Russia in the 1920s, using their 800 FEMA concentration camps, their 3 billion hollow-tipped bullets, their millions of four-body plastic coffins, their militarization of the police, the thousands of suburban tanks, their police state executive orders, Obama authorized already. Then Americans will hit back with their guns and there'll be a civil war, killing millions, until these hated Jewish bankster Frankist Satanists are hunted down worldwide and slaughtered for causing such massive crimes against humanity. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. YouTube channel name De Garis, Masculist, MGTOW, Flyers. Cheers.